Hello, and thank you for joining us for this Hagley History Hangout. I am Gregory Hargreaves, Program Officer in the Center for the History of Business, Technology, and Society at the Hagley Museum and Library. And I'm being joined today by Dr. Karen Mahar, Professor and Co-Director of American Studies at Siena College. Good morning, Karen. Thanks for joining me.
Morning, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Now, supported by an NEH-Hagley Fellowship in 2018, Dr. Mahar used Hagley collections to research her book project, which is called Corner Office, Masculinity and the American Business Executive. Karen, let's begin with your project here. How are you using gender to better understand American business culture?
Well, I'll tell you. Well, it started off with I'm a 20th century historian, right? And so I tend to, and I love teaching, and I love teaching students about like, well, how did we get to where we are now? And one of the places we are now is that there's still this really tiny number of women and people of color, for that matter, as CEOs or on boards, and it just doesn't move. Like that needle doesn't move very much. And I had written a book already on women filmmakers in the early 20th century, and it was the same story. And in that book, I found out that at least my hypothesis was that it was when the banking industry from Wall Street moved into Hollywood, and they're like, oh no, this is not how you run a business. And they began to define lots of things, including what kind of person you could trust with like big budgets and directing people, bossing people, right? And so I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna have to like figure out where this goes. So, because I really think I was right. So anyway, so that's what got me started. I've been working on and off for like quite a long time, but that's what got me started. But I have to tell you that over the years, my thinking has changed, and it really changed when I was at Hagley. And here's how my thinking has changed. When I was there, I'm beginning in the early 20th century, which is actually my favorite period anyway. And I went down the stacks, and I really just did what I haven't done in years, which is to walk the stacks, like old school. And I was walking the stacks, and I came across this like book about executives in like 1917, and it was the first, and it turned out it is the first like textbook about like how to become an executive, what an executive is. And because the word itself wasn't really even used until like 1910ish, it meant like an executive in government, or the word, it was just used really differently. It didn't mean business executive. They existed, but the language was a little bit lagging. And so anyway, long story short, I was reading this in my lovely cubicle, which was awesome, um, and it was all about eugenics, and it was all about how you literally have to be a certain kind of man. And it was this study, which of course was kind of ridiculous, but anyway, a study about how like the leaders of any kind of business or even like religious organization, they're all literally taller, broader, have a better digestive engine. And it was like all of these statistics, and it was somebody from like who was like very well educated, and it was the first book. And so I'm like, huh. And so to make a long story short, I began to really rethink this in terms of, and I've been thinking about this for a while, in terms of casting it more broadly. It's really not about women, right? It's about the men. And it's about a certain kind of man, and that man is white, right? Typically white, and has a certain bearing. And what I'm finding out, and so it's not just about gender anymore. It's really about man and masculinity. But if you step back, it's about being Black or being even Jewish. Like there's a lot of anti-Semitism that I'm discovering. It's about being anything except sort of this idealized corporate executive who looks a lot like our current president in terms of a lot of people's mind. Like it's that kind of masculinity that is seen as a natural leader. And so I'm looking at men, but not, again, it started with looking at women, but now I'm like what I'm finding, and this is probably no surprise to anybody, but what I'm tracing is that you have over the 20th century and starting in the 19th century, you have these systems about who is a good leader, or how do you judge a person's abilities. And what I found a lot, well, like past World War I, was systems that were not just like eugenics, like, oh, we're going to scientifically prove, who's the better man, but it's phrenology. Like all of these like pseudoscience, but it was like eugenics, pseudoscience, but like it was taken as science.
Uh-huh.
And so there's
Uh,
all these, like, what it seems to me is like we keep reinventing systems for keeping leaders looking white and male. And so what I'm really doing now is like looking at these systems, and we still do them. We just keep reinventing the scientific system. Does that make sense?
right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of what I'm doing, and I'm looking at it through the lens of executives in the United
Uh-huh.
States.
Yeah.
But like the bigger picture is like, whoa, we keep reinventing these systems. And so I'm just tracing the systems that they used in management, but
Mhm.
there's systems all over the place in all kinds of fields. But this is the one that I'm doing. So that's my lens. I'm looking at business, but what I'm really looking at something bigger. It's like,
Yeah.
how do we keep reinventing this belief? And it's to the present day. Actually, what I found, there's a lot of what I do is not done so much in the United States, like my questions and that kind of thing, but often in like Australia and Canada and New Zealand even. And some of the work that they had done down there was looking at current corporate headhunters. Okay, and
Mhm.
these corporate headhunters
Sure.
were literally looking for tall men. They didn't say white, but tall men. Like they're still looking for that.
Yeah.
And so like outright, and I don't know if I would find it here. I'm still in the early 20th century, so I'll get there, but nonetheless I'm like, wow, like we just keep reinventing it. So anyway, so that's what I'm
Yeah.
doing. So I look at management systems, and I look at individual entrepreneurs, because there's always exceptions to the rule, and if you've proven yourself, um then you're okay. But if you're
Mhm.
looking for like new talent, you definitely go for this stereotype, which
Yeah.
keeps getting reinvented.
And it sounds more like you're describing livestock than
Oh, I know.
humans.
Oh, okay. So I have to tell you a story. So I'm sitting in my cubicle, and Roger Horowitz, who like, he's so great. He knocks on my door, and he's like, "I have something you should see." And I'm like, "All right." And he brings in this DuPont, there's something from DuPont Personnel, and it's 1941 to 1942. And they were looking, they're like, "Oh, there's going to be a shortage of PhDs in chemistry. And so we better get really on it because, the war is coming." And so it's like it looks like a yearbook. Like you open it up, and there's like on one side there's it looks like passport photos or yearbook photos of these PhDs, and on the other side you have the notes from personnel, like because they interviewed
Uh-huh.
them,
Uh-huh.
and the notes are unbelievable. So I was just looking at it last night, thinking about talking to you today, and I'm just like, it's such a treasure. And he's like, "You could write an article just about that." I'm like, "Yeah, I totally could, and I probably should." So anyway, so these descriptions of the men, it starts out with things you would expect. Starts out with where they went to school, what they studied, who they're with, who they studied with, that kind of thing, what their dissertation is, and then the personal comments always start with their appearance. Always start with the tall, short, blonde, dark. It's got their weight, it's got their height, because that's important for a chemist. And
Yeah.
it goes into ethnicities almost right away. And they rate them. Like there's 5 categories of ratings. And often at the bottom are people, they're like, "Nope, too Jewish." 1941 to 42. Or they'll just say, "Too foreign looking." And I have the pictures, and I'm looking at the pictures, and I'm like, what? You know, like you can't, and so it's just, it seems bananas to still find that in the early 40s, especially the anti-Semitism, which is like the strongest note, which is pervasive. It wasn't just DuPont, you know. Um, but it's, so that's what I'm finding. It's like when you get down to the nitty gritty about like who do you want to lead, and it's very much about them having executive ability. So they're PhDs in science, and so they're like, okay, good in lab work, original thinking. But what they're really looking for, what gets them the highest mark, is like, oh, we can see this person being an executive. And they
See.
literally say that. And that's what gets them the highest mark. And from my reading of this, what gets them the highest mark is not their scientific credentials, it's what they look like. It's something else too. It's often like this thing they call personality. And that's definitely one of the leading things, because they come up with all these tests, obviously the IQ test and other tests for like, but they decide right after World War I, when they come up with these IQ tests, that it doesn't work for executives. And it doesn't work for executives because it doesn't measure this thing called personality,
Mm, I
which
see.
gives you that much room to figure out like who fits, And so, but they're serious about it. They're like, oh no, there's this like magic something. But it seems to me that magic something has a lot to do with what they would call in that time like manly bearing. Like, can you lead? Are people going to trust you? Are stakeholders going to trust you? Are people who own stocks, are they going to trust you? It's a lot of it's about that. And I think that's really what this is. But my job is to trace it and nail it. So the problem with me at Hagley is that it's everywhere. And it's so hard to know like what to look at next. It's just taking me forever because it's everywhere. But I think I'm finally getting a handle on it. But anyway, I'm talking too much, but there you go.
Well, no, it's totally fascinating. And do you find this very similarly across industries?
Yeah, I'm not looking at any one industry, although that would probably save my sanity, but no, I'm not doing that because I really have, I don't know, my brain thinks like bird's eye, So I'm I'm really looking at where it shows up. And actually it shows up mostly in prescriptive literature, like who is an executive, like who should be an executive, or tests for executives. It's in this idealization. So it's actually a little bit harder to like say, okay, oh, here's where it really pans out. And that's why what Roger brought me was so important, because it's like, here it is, concrete. It happens at the ground level. You can see it actually being enacted right here.
Yeah, it's a gatekeeping function.
Yes, but you can see the gate, but to see the people not getting through the gate and the actual evidence for that is really key, because a lot of personnel records are very difficult to get. They're often destroyed. So it's really that is like a treasure. When you brought that to me, I almost fainted.
Well, I suspect too, as these systems are reiterated generation after generation, the previous iteration begins to look embarrassing. Even though it's being used for the exact same purpose, right?
That is one of the amusing things, is when they're like, oh no, they didn't know what they were talking about. This is what we're doing now. Oh, they misunderstood everything, but they just recreate the same thing. So yeah, so it goes from eugenics, right? And so that's heyday for eugenics is like 1910s, early 1920s. It starts to kind of trail off, and then you get new human relations. Oh, you have to understand your workers. Well, who best understands the worker? Who can best lead the workers? They just reiterate it. So yeah, they throw out the previous system, embrace the new one, but the new one is like embedded with the same values, right? And again, I don't think this is a shock to anybody. I don't think I'm like blowing anybody away, but we all know this, but like I don't think anyone's really traced it. And it shows up all over the place. It shows up in all kinds of like markers of masculinity, and we know that's why I call it corner office. The corner office is a marker that you're the leader, right? So these are markers, and so the markers tend to exclude certain kinds of people, and that's what I'm after. But the markers about masculinity, because even among men, there's this hierarchy of who can be a leader, who can, often based on how tall you are. I mean, it sounds nuts, but it's true. In fact, there's a study not too long ago, which you may have seen, that people who are taller literally get paid more. Like now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's in the air we breathe, these values, but it's nice to sort of force them into the sunlight.
Exactly. Sometimes that's the most powerful research, is when you, as you say, you can bring to light something that's, so to speak, fish don't know they're swimming in water.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly.
Until they're told.
Right. Well, so.
I wonder, how did your time at Hagley aid your professional development, particularly as a senior scholar?
Oh my God, I can't even tell you. So I'm in a teaching college, and I totally love to teach. I really do. And I put tons of energy in it, and I really don't put enough into my research, which is really frustrating, but like, we make our choices. So I can't really overestimate how important it was for me to get that, because it gave me a year off. And I have the kind of brain that doesn't transition very well. And so when I'm teaching, it's very hard for me to keep up with my scholarship. it's not good. So, so I really need a full break. And that offered me a really full break. And I can't imagine a better place to be. And it wasn't just so much the library, which obviously is awesome, but just the people who are there and meeting younger scholars. Because again, I'm going to teach, I don't teach graduate students. I'm in a liberal arts college. So to meet graduate students, for A, I learned a lot of apps, and B, it just was so energizing. And not just them, not just the younger scholars, but like everybody who's there, because I have not been in an atmosphere like that in ages. And it's very good to hear that what you are interested in, other people find important. When you've been away as long as I have from graduate school, like you kind of like, well, who cares? I'm a full professor, like who cares? But like people do care. And I care. And so it makes me, really lit a fire under me to like keep this going and finish it, for God's sake. So the support is, I can't underestimate it. And, not to be immodest, but I think I was good for them too, so we were living in the housing, right? Which was just gorgeous to wake up and like look out the window. I'm like, wow, and so it was just, it was one of the best experiences I've had, honestly. It was terrific.
We really strive to build a community of scholarship and of scholars.
Yeah.
And
I'm still in touch with them. Yeah, and just understand, like I can't even. They taught me so much about what's going on now and the questions people are asking now, and it was terrific. Yeah.
Well, I have one question that I'm sure the audience is burning to hear your take on as well. What are the implications of your work for the present day? As you say, these systems of valuing certain traits in a leader are still with us quite evidently. So maybe what are the implications that you could share for the present?
Well, I hope it gets picked up by people who actually do this, like not just historians, but like if it gets, you know what I mean? Like if it gets a plug in, Fortune magazine, I'd be okay with that. Or Business Week or someplace where like people see it, because it matters to me what people do now. And I love history, and I'm a 20th century historian because I'm really interested in like, well, how did we get here? Like right here, like right now, And so I just hope it has some actual effect. Like I hope people like it as scholarship. I hope they're like, oh wow, she really did research, I hope that happens. I hope it's well written. I hope all those things are said. But what I really hope is that somebody sees it who can do something.
What would you hope them to do?
Say we need to stop this. and so because I've been through, as you have too, been through lots of gender workshops and how to identify discrimination, but it doesn't get to this, you know what I'm saying? It doesn't unpack this. And I keep seeing, and I hope that nobody beats me to this punch because it's so obvious to me, but I keep seeing these headlines like, how can we change these tiny statistics of people who, diversity, and how come after all these years? And I'm like, I know. I don't know if you can change it, but the first step is to admit you have a problem, right? So yeah, so I hope it's well reviewed in the academic world, and I hope that somebody reads it who's not an academic. Yeah. Because
as you say, it does affect all aspects of our life today.
Right. My job is not to apply it though. My job is to just say, here you go. So.
Well, Karen, thank you so much for chatting with me today and sharing your work. It's been really fascinating.
Oh, thank you, Greg. Back to it.
All right.
All right. Bye.
Bye.